So welcome everyone to this session of the 2020 Norfolk VCSE conference. Before I introduce Nikki, who is going to lead the session today, if I just ask if you're not speaking to remain on mute. If you want to have your camera on or off, that's up to you. But if you are speaking later on, it would be great to kind of see some faces. Please do use the chat to post any thoughts, messages, etc. as we go through the session. Yeah, so I'll hand over to Nikki. Thank you for being with us. It's great to have you and look forward to the session.
Thanks, Sasha. So hi, good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Nikki. I am the UK Parliament's Outreach Officer in the East of England. So what that means is my job is to go into schools and meet with community groups, so people like you, and I chat to people about Parliament. So who it is, what it does, but most importantly, how you can get involved. So that's exactly what we're going to be doing for the next hour or so. I'm thinking all about Parliament. I see some people have already started to do it. So if you haven't, do introduce yourself in the chat box. Let us know who you are, what organisation you're from. Helping me with the session today is my colleague Gillian. So I'll just let her introduce herself.
Hello everybody, it's Gillian Bell. I work as the UK Parliament Outreach Officer in the northeast of England. So normally I would be out and about in my own region, but by the wonders of COVID and digital technology, I'm here supporting Nikki today. So it's very nice to be down in the east of England for a change. I'm going to be supporting Nikki. I'll be checking the chat box. So if you've got any questions, I can try and answer them and also relay any comments or questions to Nikki as well as we go on.
Yeah, so as Gillian said, please feel free to put any questions that you have in the chat box. We really would encourage you to do that. Like mine and Gillian's job is to help you find out everything that you want to know about Parliament, but we won't know what that is unless you tell us. So there are no stupid questions. There are no questions that are too big or too small. Put them all in the chat box as we go along, and we'll do our best to answer them. We're going to give you kind of lots of opportunity to share your opinions today. We'll be asking you a few quiz questions. So yeah, please do share your opinions. There might be times if we're kind of on one topic for a while, or if we hear from the same few voices, I might move us on, just because we only have an hour and we have quite a lot to cover. So if I do that, I'm not trying to kind of stop anyone from sharing your opinions. It's just to kind of keep the pace up. But please do that. Yeah, and use the chat box, and we might give you time to use come on the microphone as well. So today then, as we said, we're going to be thinking all about Parliament, so who works and what it does. We're going to be thinking about your MP and how to get your voice heard. I know you got asked like in a little survey before this what you know about Parliament. There were most people put themselves down as a bit, which I like because it's so wide compassing, it could mean anything. There are a couple of people who said they didn't know anything, which is absolutely fine. And me and Gillian wouldn't have jobs if everybody knew everything there is to know about Parliament. There's a couple of people who said loads, which is great. Hopefully we'll all learn something new today. But to start off, I actually want to hear from you. So what I would like to know from you is kind of what matters to you. So it's almost like, what are you campaigning on at the moment? What are you wanting to change or improve? So what are the problems that you are experiencing or you know of? So it could be in your local area. It could be through the organisations you work with. And then once you have that problem, what is it you actually want to change and improve? Because we're going to be thinking all about campaigning today. And actually a big part of campaigning is not just identifying problems, but thinking about the solutions as well. So share all of your thoughts in the chat box, and I'll give you a bit of time to do that.
So we've already had a question as to what are the best ways for groups to raise issues and influence policy, but that is what we're going to be focusing on today. So hopefully by the end of the session that question will be answered, but please do keep asking questions if you've got anything specific to ask. Unresponsive local MP. I think one thing I would say is keep trying, keep being persistent. MPs get thousands of emails every week. If you can be specific about the issue you're raising, and if they still don't reply, then we can suggest other ways, other places to look.
Yeah, I think, yeah, really good advice from Gillian. As you said, they get so much correspondence. You know, if you were going to message a friend and they didn't reply to you, you wouldn't just leave it, you get on there. But as Gillian said, we'll talk about some kind of other avenues you can go down as well. Is anyone sharing anything that's important to them, anything that they're kind of working on at the moment?
So improving identification and support for carers of all ages is the aim, says Andy.
Interesting.
Jean says, trying to get better services in our area for childhood sex abuse. Have contacted my MP, had a meeting, who went to the CCG, just feels like fancy words that don't work on the ground, feels like it's a waste of time. How to influence locally with national policies? Who do we talk to in the local area? Oh, and Gary says, I think a key area is getting more focus on the Social Value Act, implementation and commissioning.
Interesting.
Susan says 2 major campaigns at the moment. Scrap 6 months, looking at access to benefits using the special rules for terminal illness, and Act to Adapt, looking at access to accessible housing. Wow, there's lots of issues. Issue of new emphasis on community-based activities to support people, but without resources to support groups. Yeah, would be great to get a redistribution of resources. Yes, indeed, so much to do.
Yeah, and I think that's a really kind of interesting array of kind of topics and things that you're interested in there. And I think it's really interesting to think about, you know, imagine if you were the member of parliament and you had all of these different people, all of these different campaigns, which everyone thinks, you know, their campaign is important. They all have different kind of equal importance. It's interesting to think about that from an MP's perspective. And if you were the MP, how would you deal with having all of those different issues in? But it's really great to hear that actually you have lots of things that you're passionate about, lots of things that you want to change and improve, because that's really our starting point. Is these are the things that matter to you, so what can you do, how can you go about changing them? So thank you everyone for sharing all of those things. So we probably need to know a little bit about how Parliament works before we start. So this is the Houses of Parliament here. You might have actually visited, you might have been inside, or you might just have seen it on TV. So Parliament is made up of 2 houses. So we have Lords and Baronesses who work in the House of Lords, and MPs who work in the House of Commons. And the job of Parliament is to pass the legislation, so to pass all of the laws that we follow. But they also scrutinise, they also check the work of the government. So government is taken from Parliament. Government is mainly MPs, but some Lords and Baronesses from the biggest political party. So at the moment, that is the Conservative Party. And government runs the country. So they come up with kind of all of the policies, the way in which the country is run. They decide what all of our taxes get spent on. So that's happening actually at the moment in Parliament. The Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rishi Sunak, is talking about the spending review and what the kind of government's priorities will be. So government run the country, and it's the job of Parliament, so all of the other MPs and all of the Lords and Baronesses, to scrutinise them, to ask them questions about the decisions they make, and then debate and potentially pass all of the laws, the legislation that the government come up with. So when you're thinking about your campaign, you're thinking about all those issues that are really important to you, it's really important to think about the difference between Parliament and government. And I guess like who has the actual power to make the change that you want. If it's a piece of legislation, then it will be Parliament. But if it's more of a kind of a policy or a spending area, then it will be the government. But you would work with Parliament to try and influence them and try to change their minds. So Parliament is House of Commons and House of Lords. Government is taken from Parliament. So we'll start by thinking about the House of Commons and thinking about our MPs. So what is the job of an MP? Do they A, make new laws, B, scrutinise, check the work of the government, C, represent their constituents, or D, all of the above? So pop your thoughts in the chat box, A, B, C or D.
Yep, lots of D's there, Nikki.
Excellent. All of my quiz questions are going to be very easy for you. So you're right. MPs have 3 jobs that they do. So they make the laws that we follow, scrutinise, ask questions of the government, and they represent us. They talk on our behalf about the things that are important to us. So they all work here inside the House of Commons. There are 650 MPs, and we elect them. We vote them to represent their constituency, and the constituency is the areas that we live within. So, I mean, I suppose I might hand over to you at this point. What would you like to know about the House of Commons or MPs? Are we focused maybe at the moment specifically on the way that Parliament works as opposed to the kind of campaigning bit, because we're going to come on to that. But is there anything you've ever seen happening, like when you've watched clips of Parliament, or anything you've heard words that you're like, what does that word mean? What's going on there? If you do, pop your questions in the chat box. So what do you want to know about how the House of Commons works? And welcome. I think there's a few people that have just joined us, so welcome. We've only just started. We're just thinking about the House of Commons at the moment, how the House of Commons works. So my name's Nikki and we have Gillian, and we're both from the UK Parliament. So welcome to those who've just joined.
Oh, so we've got first question, what is the role of whips? Yeah,
really interesting question. So each political party have a group of people called the whips. And they're basically like the eyes and ears of the party. So they make sure, 1, everybody votes, and 2, everybody votes the right way, i.e. along with the political party. So they produce a weekly document called the whip, which basically just sets out all the votes that are coming that week, and then they're underlined depending on importance. So if a vote is underlined 3 times, then it means you have no excuse bar death not to be at Parliament and not to attend that vote. Obviously at the moment, slightly different with obviously people shielding and stuff, that you can choose someone to vote in your place, they vote by proxy, and get someone to, you tell them basically how you want to vote and they go in. So the whips, I guess, they are a little bit of kind of keeping the party together, but they do a little bit of HR. For their members, they have a group called a flock. That's who they look after, and they're a little bit of HR as well. But mainly kind of, making sure the party works together, I suppose, and it works as a unit as it's meant to, as the public have kind of voted for it to do.
So Andy says he never knew that was where the term 3-line whip came from.
Yeah.
Ian's asking about the role of select committees. I think we'll be coming on to that, won't we?
Yeah, we're going to come on to select committees. So save your questions for them. That's great.
Jenny asks, can MPs choose which debates they attend in person? There often only seems to be a few people present in some of the debates.
Yeah, you're completely right. So MPs, they basically don't, they're technically kind of self-employed, so they don't have like a set number of hours they have to work, a set number of debates or things they have to attend. So it's kind of really up to them in terms of kind of what debates they go to and what work they're involved in. So you're right, like often you might look at the House of Commons chamber here and you think, oh, there's only a few MPs in that debate. But actually one of the reasons for that is that not all of an MP's work takes place here inside the House of Commons. So there's a second debating chamber called Westminster Hall, where petitions get debated and often lots of local issues get talked about there. And we've mentioned select committees, which we'll come on to, but there's a whole range of other committees that MPs take part in, other ways of scrutinising the government and scrutinising legislation, so laws. And also they might often be meeting you, their constituents, having meetings with individual people as well. So yeah, not all of their work takes place in here, and it isn't necessarily the best use of an MP's time just to kind of sit in the chamber and listen to other people talk. At the moment, because of social distancing, they can only have up to 50, so 50 MPs present in the House of Commons at any one time. But some can come in, well, not in debates, I don't think, but in general question time, they can come in via Zoom.
And Anastasia asks, what does it mean to have the whip removed?
Yeah, so basically, it's kind of a few kind of different ways that comes about, but if you voted against your political party, so if you did that quite a few times, then you can have the whip removed. And basically what that means is you're not stopped from being an MP. So because you've been elected by the public, a political party kind of couldn't stop you, but you can either kind of get kicked out of the party, or it means you're not kind of just voting kind of within that party's kind of group, essentially. So you're basically kind of not in the party anymore. It's a discipline issue. So any more questions at this point?
No.
Cool, excellent. So that's the House of Commons then. We know our MPs work there. Now, we've kind of already had a bit of a chat about this. So in terms of when you're thinking about campaigning, always your first port of call should be your local MP. So your MP obviously have been elected to talk for their constituents, to represent you, talk on your behalf. And I think when we did the kind of pre-question, actually most people had contacted their MP, which is really good. So your MP can't always help you. They have kind of certain parameters that they have to work within, but their job is at least to respond to you. So you can contact them if you want support with your campaign, if you feel like you've been treated unfairly with a government kind of office or agency, if you want a change in the law, or if you want kind of help with a campaign in your local area. Now, really, I want to throw this back to you because I know lots of people have contacted their MPs. So I wonder if people would like to share their experience of that. So if you have a positive experience of a time you've worked with your MP, so it might be on a personal issue, it might be through your organisation, or if you've had any challenges and if you've been able to overcome those challenges, how did you do that? So share your thoughts in the chat box. So if anyone would like to unmute and come on the mic and say their points, then please feel free to do so as well. And hopefully you all know who your MP is, but if you don't, Gillian's popped a link in the chat box. I think, Jean, have you unmuted your mic?
Yeah, just to say that I went to see Elizabeth Truss about the fact that there's nothing in the west of Norfolk area for people who have suffered childhood sex abuse and they need help to recover. And getting the appointment was really easy. She was really kind, she listened to us, but it just seemed that it was one of those letters that came back. They wrote to the CCG and they just come back and said what I call fancy words. They say what, but that wasn't happening. It wasn't on the ground, and you feel deflated because you've done what you thought might actually shift things, but it just depends. They don't seem to have any power.
Yeah, and I think that's actually a really interesting observation that I think a lot of MPs have said this themselves. So as a member of parliament, you have influence rather than power. So what would the difference be? Well, I suppose power would be, I can move this water bottle that I have here. I can move that myself. Whereas influence will be, I could try and convince somebody else who has the power to move this water bottle to do it for me. And I think that's really interesting. I suppose my question would be for you. So you had that meeting, which you thought was very kind of positive. They wrote that letter. What did you do next?
Well, I couldn't see anywhere else to go. She'd written to them and then she sent me back the results because obviously the CCG wrote to her and she forwarded it on to me, and I couldn't see anywhere else to go because in fact I had really put myself in a situation where I was knocked out for a couple of days by the way that I tried to influence her, in the sense of showing myself as a child and my abusers. So, and it was the first time I'd done that, but knowing that she had children, I thought that would make an impact.
Yeah, and I think actually that's really brave of you that you did that. And I think that's a really important point to highlight about any campaigning, is the personal impact, the burnout that can have on you. And I think that was a really brave thing that you did. And I think you have highlighted an important point there about contacting MPs, is really to use your personal experience. I think you highlighted there a way that you could connect with her, that she has children, that you found something that on a personal level you can connect with. And I think that's a really important point about contacting the MP. And a second point you raised there about, campaigning is hard. Like, I can't give you any kind of quick fixes here, but what you've highlighted is that, it's never going to be just one letter, one petition, one thing that's gonna move things on. It will be a succession of things, but I think that self-care that you've identified there is really important in thinking about managing that. So thank you.
Also, but even before I went to her, I'd actually stood up in CCGs and asked, but they sort of sideline you and then they drop you. So that was my reason for continuing to go along. So I actually hadn't gone straight to my MP. I had tried other angles.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Okay, let's open that up to other people then. Anyone else have any other thoughts they want to share? Kind of challenges they had? How, if you've been in a situation, Jean, did you overcome it?
Steve in the chat box has written that MPs are often conflicted between the party line and their constituencies' concerns. They can't always directly help anyway, so they're sort of in a sticky rights.
Yeah, definitely. Again, another really thing to think about when you're thinking about campaigning is that you're right. So an MP is going to have, I suppose, 3 kind of pools on how they might help. So you're right. What the party actually says, what is in the party's manifesto, what are they saying? As constituents, constituents, they look after about 70,000 people, so they're all never going to have like the same opinions. And then their own personal views, their own kind of ideology and how it's backed it up. So it's thinking about really tailoring your message and thinking, how can you connect with them? What are they talking about at Parliament? What are they saying? So really interesting, I think, important point to make.
James says he's found that MPs have unlocked blockages in government departments or local authorities through exerting their influence.
Interesting. James, do you want to explain that a bit more? Are you able to come on the microphone and talk to us a bit more about that?
Yeah, primarily the issue was we were trying to go through a charity registration and were constantly hitting blocks with the Charity Commission. So we kind of copied the MP in on a couple of bits of correspondence, and even though they were from different political parties, one wrote to the chair of the Charity Commission, one wrote to the chief executive of the Charity Commission, both with similar content. And within a week that was unblocked, and a full kind of apology from the Commission about unacceptable standards. We'd been banging on for about 6 months to try and unblock it ourselves. So that was a really positive thing from our point of view.
And I think that's really nice to hear. And actually, you've highlighted again another really, I think, important point there is in your campaigning, you got support from MPs in different political parties, which I think is really important because it shows that your issue isn't a party political one. It's more of a general issue, which I think is really important to show. And I think that ties in with what Gary has said about kind of MPs having sort of pet projects. And I agree with that. But I suppose when you're thinking about campaigning, okay, so just like all of you all have your certain things that you're interested in. So if you were going to go to somebody else on this call and say, I want your help with something, how would you convince them to take time out of what they are interested in and what they are focused on to help you? So I would say, think about maybe how you can link up what you want to campaign about with what their pet projects are. And actually, those pet projects might work in your favour, and we'll come back to that in the moment. Anything else in the chat box, and then we'll move on to thinking about what you can actually ask your MP to do and who else you can go to.
There's quite a long example from Jan. Sorry, it's my eyesight. I think I called you Ian earlier. I don't know if you want to explain this, Jan, about the parish councillor who raised an issue with your MP.
Yes. Okay. So it's an example which highlights a broader issue. Okay. So the example is, we have a real issue with Network Rail and the fact that we've got a railway going through and we've got level crossings and access to properties and so on, whilst major infrastructure work was being carried out. And essentially, the private companies were going ahead with limited community engagement on what they were doing, limited response to the issues raised by our community. And so we appealed to the MP to be able to, to exert influence, as you say, influence on those companies. But the thing is, these are private companies delivering a public service, and they are not transparent. It's very confusing as to who to contact, because there are a multitude of companies that Network Rail then contract and then they subcontract and so on. So, but that is happening across government. And we talk about the privatisation of the NHS and so on, and often the difficulty is actually pinning down who is responsible and who to talk to. And actually the MPs are often confused as well. But it's a system that has been created, and I think it's interestingly, our new MP, when he came into post, I think he discovered this mess and was quite amazed and surprised, even though, he was of the party of government. And he's struggling with that, perhaps. And as somebody else said earlier, conflicted. So what I'm interested in is influencing people like that to give examples of where the system is not working in the interests of communities on the ground. So we can give those, the Network Rail one is a real issue for our parish. It has been and it's ongoing. But it illustrates a wider problem, I think, for our MPs, is when these services are contracted out to private companies.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting, kind of point around, MPs finding out, I suppose, how the system works and the challenges that they face within. So, thank you very much for sharing that. I think more press on, because somehow we're already halfway through our time. So we'll think about what you can actually get your MPs to do for you at Parliament. So a couple of things. You can ask them to ask a question to a government minister. So each different government department will have a question time once every kind of 5 or 6 weeks. And MPs can basically enter a ballot. So they pull names out of a hat to ask a question to that minister. They can also ask them to ask a written question. And all of these written questions actually are searchable on the Parliament website. So it might be that someone has asked the question that you're interested in, and you could find your answer on there. So that's worth doing, because actually you can contact ministers directly yourself, but the minister doesn't have to respond to you, whereas they do have to respond to the MP. So as long as your MP is willing to ask that question, then you're guaranteed to get a response. Might not be the response you want, but you will get one. And then you might want to take that further, and you might want them to hold or speak in a debate. So you can find out on the Parliament website the debates that are coming up. And I would always say, like, top tips for these, if you want them to do it, is, I guess, kind of do the work for them. So if you have a question, if you could write that question, if you want them to speak in a debate, if you can give them kind of bullet points information, the easier that you can make it for them to help you out, the easier it is for them to do. Because, as Gillian said, MPs can get up to 400 emails a day. They have lots and lots of people pulling on their time. The easier you can make it for them. And why is any of this worth doing? So why would you ask your MP to ask a question or speak in a debate? Well, both for questions and debates, the minister has to be present. So they have to say what they have done or what they will be doing around that issue. So actually they need to go away and do a little bit of research into it, look it up. So it might be that it raises the issue that wasn't already on the MP or the minister's kind of radar. And often, like particularly with debates, if lots of people talk at them, they could get picked up by the media as well. And like, say you wrote to your MP and they said, yep, we'll ask a question. If you have social media, share that on there. That's a win. Campaigning, as we've heard from Jean, is really hard. It can take a lot of time, a lot of mental toil. So take all of those small wins, having a question, having them respond to you, that is a win. And I think you have to focus on kind of those smaller steps sometimes that are getting you towards that bigger goal in the end. So these are things that you can ask your MP to do for you at Parliament. But I think we've heard from a few people that, you know, maybe you've contacted your MP and perhaps they haven't given you the response you want, or you feel like you've gone as far as you can with them. Who else can you go to at Parliament? How can you find other kind of allies, other people to support you? Well, that's the next thing we're going to have a little think about. But just to give you a few examples before we go on of times when people have successfully campaigned with their MPs. So this one in the middle, or sorry, the one at the bottom about feminism. So it was this girl, June, she was only 17. She wrote to her MP saying that she thought feminism should be on the A-level politics course. Her MP held a debate, asked the education minister about this, and they got that put back on. So she's a really good example of just one person who took the time to do it. The example at the top about the mental health units, this was a woman whose son unfortunately died in a mental health unit. So he was forcibly restrained and killed by the guards who worked there. So they worked with their local MP to get this piece of legislation through, looking at people who work in mental health units to have training around discrimination, about unconscious bias, and other issues as well. So just a couple examples of people who have worked successfully with their MPs. So one of the ways, and I will say everything that I'm saying today, I'm going to send you, I'll send it to Tasha, a kind of a nice compressed version of this with the links and with all the information as well. But one of the ways that you can find other MPs, other Lords and Baronesses to support you is by looking at what's called all-party parliamentary groups. So all-party parliamentary groups, or APPGs, they're kind of like clubs or societies, I suppose, at Parliament. They don't have any kind of formal standing, but they're groups of MPs and Lords and Baronesses who are interested in a particular subject. So, for example, this one here is the APPG on motor neuron disease. So you can see what their purpose there. It's to raise awareness and provide a forum for people with this and for their families as well. And you can see here a list of MPs and, well, sometimes Lords and Baronesses who are in this group. So this is one way that you can go, okay, who is already interested in my topic? Who already wants to get involved with it? You could then contact that MP and say, I am contacting you on the basis that you are part of this group. So it's another way of finding allies, of finding people to support you. And as I said, these people are already kind of on side with it. So that's might be why they're a good group of people to contact. So one way of finding allies is the APPGs, and actually coming back to, I can't remember who was, maybe James' point about the cross-party as well, that's really useful to show that there's a wide range of support for your issue. Another way you can find support for your campaign is through what's called early day motions. So early day motions are a bit like, I guess, internal petitions, I suppose. MPs can sign them to say that they kind of support a topic, and it's a means of raising awareness. So often these get picked up by the press, by the media, and they can be used as a way of raising awareness more generally with the public. So for example, this is around Young Carers Day awareness. So these are all searchable online, they're all in the public domain. So you could search for your particular topic. I think in this case, maybe I searched for carers. And again, you have a whole list on there of MPs from all different political parties. Here we've got Labour, Conservative, Plaid Cymru, DUP, people who, again, support this kind of particular motion, this particular idea. So it's almost a way of finding those people and thinking, okay, who else can I go to? Who else could I potentially ask to support me? So just a couple ways of finding other allies there. So hopefully that's kind of giving you some food for thought in who you might contact and who you might be able to find them. We had a question about select committees earlier on, who they are and what they do. So select committees, if you've never heard of them, because there might be some people who haven't, there are both select committees in the House of Lords and the House of Commons, but we'll focus on the ones in the House of Commons today. So a select committee is a group of cross-party MPs who scrutinise the work of a particular government department. So each government department, so like the Department of Health, Department of Education, will have a group of MPs who look into the work they do. And what select committees do is they choose a particular topic that they want to run an inquiry into. They'll then publish this on the Parliament website, and they ask for evidence. So they ask for feedback, basically. And any member of the public, so any one of you, can give evidence, can give your thoughts, your experiences to that select committee. They then have people come in and give oral evidence, so evidence in person or online, and they then produce a report with ideas around this subject and how it can be improved, which the government have 60 days, so 2 months to respond to. So at the moment, actually, there's loads of different inquiries that are being run by lots of different select committees. So there's one looking into the disability employment gap, looking into the impact of living online, and which obviously we're experiencing at the moment. There's ones looking into grassroots sports, climate change. So there's a whole range of select committees that look at lots of different topics. And this is something that you can do, I guess, kind of maybe independently or through your organisation, insofar as that you would work kind of directly with that select committee as opposed to having to go through a particular MP. So it's a really powerful way that you can share your lived experiences on a topic. You can say, this is how this affects me, this affects my community, this is what the impact of this issue will have on me. I wonder, has anybody ever given evidence to a select committee before? If you have, if you want to come on the mic and share your experiences, it'd be interesting to hear. Or if you have any questions about select committees, APPGs or EDMs, pop them in as well. Or actually, if you have experience of working with an APPG, it'd just be interesting to hear people's experiences if they have.
So Andy's worked with an APPG. I don't know whether you want to talk about that, say a bit more.
Yeah, that was just around in terms of, it was a while back now, but it was around, as you wouldn't be surprised, around young carers. So it was in the work where we were trying to campaign for the around the Children and Families Act and the introduction of the right for a young carers assessment. So linking in there, so obviously that was a real positive one from that perspective.
So how did you find work with them, like, and how did that kind of link come about? Did you contact them? Did they contact you?
So that was one, and it sort of linked to my earlier question. It was through some of the national organisations, so through Carers Trust and Children's Society, and I think that's the thing that helped give it in terms of a bit more weight behind it. And I think that's the challenge, as to actually, as a local carers organisation, in terms of actually, is it best that we try and influence our national sort of umbrella organisations to sort of make the case, or actually will they listen to us? From that perspective, I think that's the challenge. Sometimes trying to get the message into the relevant national organisations can be just as of a challenge or time-consuming as trying to get into the political sphere as well. So.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, because I suppose, I would always encourage people to work with their networks and work with their groups, and I guess that's, I suppose, an issue almost parallel to Parliament but kind of separate at the same time, about if you are a smaller organisation, what if your interests are conflicting with the larger ones? I think that's very interesting. And how did you find working with that APPG? Was it?
Yeah, to be fair, actually, they were really receptive to it. I think at that point it had got to the stage where I think everyone had sort of accepted actually young carers did need that recognition. It had been years that sort of young carers had been sort of a thing on the agenda, but there wasn't that legal basis like any other carer. So I think in terms of compared to some of the other possible areas, it was it wasn't very contentious, I think, in terms of from that perspective. Yes, obviously behind the scenes there no doubt will have been contentions and work needed to be done. I think the challenge now is, whereas it's in legislation, but there's more bits that need to be done, and I think sometimes some of the things that are needed to be done now are much more technical things, which are harder to get across. Whereas actually, if you're saying young carers need rights, young carers need to have a right to, it's a much easier case to make. Whereas actually, some of the pieces of work we're trying to do now is actually, okay, the school census return, that statutory one, actually we need young carers to be inserted into that. That's it's much more difficult in terms of, because it's around a technical point and trying to get the reason rather than a much bigger principle point.
Yeah, and I think actually that's really interesting, and we will come on to that about this idea, particularly working with MPs, is that on those technical issues, you know, they're not experts in everything. They're not going to know kind of all of those little bits that you need, and we'll come on to actually maybe who else you could get in contact with. And really interesting, I've got that inquiry down the bottom about the COVID and the long-term impact. So this was actually a House of Lords Select Committee, and they had some young carers who gave evidence of that. So they filmed videos of themselves doing it. So really interesting to see how, yeah, young people's kind of rights are talked about at Parliament. So thank you very much for sharing that, Andy. That was a really interesting insight.
We've got a couple more questions. So Richard asks, are all these groups working as frequently online as in usual times? I know that the select committees are, and certainly there's ongoing inquiries, but APPGs, I think, because they're not regulated so much, it's up to them how they're working. Is that right?
Yeah, so select committees are working online. Actually, they led the way. So they were doing stuff on Zoom back in Easter before even the main kind of House of Commons chamber were. So select committees, they run a couple of inquiries a year. Usually they last a few months, although some of them can be shorter. So they work kind of all the parliamentary year. APPGs, as Gillian said, because they're not a formal part of Parliament, they really vary in terms of how they work. So there's some that will be very active, obviously like the one that Andy worked with, and some of the others, but some are less so. There's ones on like cheese and cats and things like that, you know, don't run inquiries in the same way. So it just depends on the particular kind of APG, what that topic is. But some of them like have their own websites and things, so you can find out pretty quickly by sort of having a Google of them, how kind of active they are and what they do.
And Claire asks, how influential are select committee reports?
Really interesting question that I could speak to you for a whole hour about. I think actually,
Yes.
Gillian, you were in that training with me about select committees on Monday, I think. So
yes,
select committees, the official stat is that the government takes up about 40% of recommendations by a select committee. But it depends on how you would judge successful, in that it also kind of, I suppose, depends on what that select committee is asking for, in that, you know, it might be, for example, the sugar tax that we have at the moment. So the fact that you have to pay, like if your fizzy drink has, you know, a certain amount of sugar in it, there's an extra tax on that. So that was actually suggested in a select committee report. I think it was it must have been House Committee. And initially in the government's response, they rejected it. But then a few months later, that turned up in the budget at that time. So it's kind of hard, I suppose. It depends on if you want immediate change or if you kind of looking long term and seeing actually how things are influenced, how things are changed. So yeah, I guess, you know, you can draw your conclusions from that, I think, about how you would judge what the impact and the influence is. So I won't dwell too much on e-petitions, because I think actually most of you said that you've started and signed them. So just to say, really good thing about petitioning and actually contacting your MP is that anybody can do it. So there's no age limit. You don't have to be a UK citizen. You just have to live here, which we all do. I'm sure a lot of you know, if your petition gets over 100,000 signatures, then it's debated or potentially debated and talked about at Parliament. And we've seen actually just in the past few days a few successful petitions. So the Marcus Rashford one about free school meals still got over 1 million signatures. And also just this week, they debated a petition around a return to people going to see football live, which was announced then. I think that got debated on Monday, but then it was a couple of days later that it got announced. And I guess perhaps one of the things that we've been alluding to with all of this campaigning is that it's never just one petition, one email, one day in which you can make your change. Campaigning, it's using a whole range of methods, a whole range of different people, and it can take time. But just because it takes time, you know, it doesn't mean that it's not worth it. So we have this example here of the Cystic Fibrosis Trust and their campaign to get this drug, or can be, free or available on the NHS. So we can see here it took them 4 years. It took them making use of a whole range of methods, so select committee inquiries, questions, getting involved in their networks to contact their MP. It was lots and lots of different things that they worked with lots of different people, but their campaigning, continuing taking that time to do it, actually, it did pay off in the end. And obviously this is perhaps a larger organisation, which some of you are part of. But even if you're not, think about the people in your networks, in your communities. How can you, kind of spread out the weight of the work that you're doing? Who else can you get involved to help you? Because there will be other people. Like in Andy's case, obviously he's a local organisation, but there are national organisations that they can work with as well. So think about things in that respect as well. There's loads and loads of things that you can do at Parliament, and we've talked about some of them already. So we've covered kind of what you can ask your MP to do, so questions, debates. We've covered ways in which you can find allies, so through EDMs, through all-party parliamentary groups. We've had a little think about things that you can kind of do directly, so select committees, petitions as well. The other group we haven't kind of considered yet are members of the House of Lords. So quick quiz question for you. How do you become a member of the House of Lords? So can you inherit a title from your family? Are you chosen for being an expert? Could you be a bishop in the Church of England? Or can it be any of those ways? So pop your thoughts in the chat box.
Yes, everyone's going for D.
I don't like to test you too much. So yeah, really easy. There are 3 different ways that you can become a member of the House of Lords, that you can work in there. But actually most of them are experts. So most of them you're recommended by the Prime Minister or the leader of the opposition. But always worth bearing in mind that you can actually nominate yourself or someone else to become a Lord or Baroness, as long as they're aged over 21, UK, Commonwealth or Irish citizen, then you can nominate them to go and work in there. So what is the role? What is the job of the House of Lords? So do they make new laws? Do they scrutinise the government? Do they debate important issues? Or do they do all of those things?
Yep, everyone's gone for D again.
Nice and easy. So main difference between House of Lords and the House of Commons in terms of their job is that because we don't elect Lords and Baronesses, they don't represent us. So they're not talking on our behalf, which actually can, if you're thinking about campaigning, can sometimes work in your favour. So most of the members of the House of Lords are experts. And there's people from a whole range of backgrounds in there. So we have, I'm going to get my little laser up so you can see. This lady in the bottom here, her name is Floella Benjamin, used to be a children's TV presenter. There's a man called Lord Bird who founded The Big Issue, and he was homeless himself for quite a long time. There's a woman called Tanni Grey-Thompson who used to be a Paralympian. So it's a whole range of people from a whole range of backgrounds. And coming back to Andy's point about the kind of the technical issues that you might go into, this is one of the reasons that getting in contact with a member of the House of Lords, they're actually a really good group of people to work with because they're already experts. They already know about your issue. So you won't have to spend the same amount of time kind of getting them up to speed in the way that you might with a member of Parliament. So that's one reason to get in contact with them, is because they're experts. And the other reason, as you said up here, is the job of the Lords is to improve the bills. So the ideas for laws that usually come from the House of Commons. And actually, because they don't represent us, so because they don't have those constituency duties, they spend much more time than the House of Commons doing really detailed scrutiny, detailed reading of those bills and suggesting amendments. So actually, if what you want to achieve is a change in legislation, then there'd be a good group of people to contact. So how would you be able to find a Lord or Baroness? Well, 2 ways. So you can just search on the Parliament website. So you can search by expertise, search by interest area, Or the other way you can do it is you can search what's called Hansard. So if you don't know what that is, it's the written record of everything that's said at Parliament. So you can just search and see who's been talking about my subject, who's interested in it, who supports it, or even who is against it, who do I need to convince? And you can find them on there as well. So that's the House of Lords, experts who help improve the bills. Any questions from you about the House of Lords, who they are and what they do?
We've got a question from Steve who asks, how influential or not are the crossbench, the non-allied lords?
Yeah, really interesting. So this group of people in our bottom right-hand corner here are called the crossbenchers. I think it was Steve who said. So crossbenchers are basically members of the House of Lords who are not in any political party. And I think this is a really interesting kind of point to make about the House of Lords, is that in the House of Lords, no political party has a majority. So the Conservatives are the biggest, but they don't have over half. And so as a house, they tend to be a little bit more rebellious than in the House of Commons. And the crossbenchers definitely play a part in that most lords and baronesses, although they are in political parties, we mentioned the whips at the start of this, the whips have less influence in the House of Lords. When you become a member of the House of Lords, you keep your title for life. So you wouldn't lose your job in the same way that an MP might if they're not elected or they're not kind of put forward for election. And because they've all had their careers, because they're experts, they tend to vote kind of more based on their own knowledge than along party lines. So the crossbenchers definitely play a part in that. I think there's about 120 of them out of around 800 lords and baronesses. So they are quite significant in the role that they play. Anything else about the House of Lords? And again, feel free to unmute yourselves if you want to rather say your question than type it as well. No, I'm going to take that silence as meaning no. So just as an example here, as someone, if you were thinking about getting in contact with a member of the House of Lords, Baroness Campbell Surbiton, and we can see her background here. She was the chair of she is the chair of the Independent Living Strategy, and was also on the British Council of Disabled People. So if your thing that you're campaigning around affected people with disabilities, she's someone who would be a good person to get in contact with, because it's her, her lived experience, but also in her professional life as well, her area of expertise. So it's just one suggestion of someone who works in the House of Lords who you might think of getting in contact with. So just to give you a couple more examples then, thinking about recent campaign that has taken place and all the kind of different elements that come into this. So this is Marcus Rashford, who we've already mentioned, and his campaign to have free school meals for children. And actually there were two kind of parts of that campaign. There was the kind of initial success for the lockdown, and then this kind of second campaign that happened here in England to extend those free school meals over the holidays. And you can see on here, so this is actually from what's called the Sheila McKechnie Foundation, which is a campaigning organisation. And it looks at all the different elements, so formal and informal, the influence of individuals and the influence of kind of wider groups in society that took to build this campaign. And hopefully it gives you a sense of, I suppose, how you're working with Parliament, because it's obviously what we're specifically focusing on today, but maybe you've attended some of the other sessions across this conference, is how would you build in the work that you do with Parliament with other areas of campaigning? So it says up here about using social media. So we mentioned about, if you got your MP to talk at Parliament, highlighting that, using that as a success, thinking about that lived experience that we have down here, working with kind of other things that are going on. We can see here a challenge that came up about they were funding Eat Out to Help Out, and how actually that could have helped raise issues and raise awareness on this campaign. So we're almost at the end, and I think the thing I want to kind of leave you with, the thing for you to go away and think about, is almost doing an analysis of where are you at the moment, where do you want to go? And so to help you out, we have this kind of it's called a hot air balloon analysis. So it's thinking about all the different elements of your campaign. So first of all, we'd have what's keeping you up, what's giving you energy, what have you got? So I suppose this is, what is your motivation? Why are you doing this? Where are you at the moment? Who is giving you that energy to go on? Who is helping you out? Then you want people in your basket. So who is already helping that out? So at Parliament, that might be MPs or Lords and Baronesses that you are already in contact with. It might be people in your network, in your community who are on side, who are helping you push. What's pinning you down? What's holding you back? So this might be economical issues, it might be political issues, it might be social things. What I suppose that's really about identifying the challenges, the problems you have, really understanding what they are. And once you've identified what those are, thinking about the ways to change them. What could blow you off course? Many of you might experience this year, you know, with the pandemic, with a lot of funding being cut for lots of different things. These are all challenges that could come up along the way that you might be harder to anticipate, or you might not realize that are coming. But then what's on the horizon? What is changing? What good things might help? How can you work with changes, challenges that are at the moment, and actually use those things to your advantage? Because I think that's the thing, especially with campaigning, is that you never necessarily know what's coming, but actually there's lots of opportunities to use all of the tools that we've spoken about today and all of the ways to go on. So I guess that's the main thing I want you to kind of take from the session today, is that Parliament is designed for you to get involved. There are lots of different people at Parliament that you can talk to. There's lots of different ways of finding those people. There's lots of different angles that you can use to get in. So if you've tried one of these things, like contacting the MP, who else can you talk to? If you feel like you contact them, how could you go to a select committee? Could you look at APPGs? What is Parliament? Parliament does a lot of reaching out. There are lots of ways if you go and have a look. So what other angles are there for you to get involved? And as we said, you know, it's never going to be one of these things. It's never going to, you know, be quick and easy. But actually, the things that you said at the start, the passion that you have, that's what's going to keep you going. If you think it's worth doing, keep going, keep trying all of these different elements. There's lots and lots of ways to get involved. So I hope that's what you can take from the session today. So does anybody have any final questions? Is there any other thoughts, anything that you'd like to speak about just before we wrap up? And just while you're thinking, so I will say that everything that I've covered today, as I said at the start, I'm going to send to Tasha and I'll get her to forward it on to you. A nice little summary of all the ways that you can get involved, a page with all of the links for all of the different things I've spoken about. But do have a look on the Parliament website. There's loads of kind of really easy information on there if you want to find out more. And there's lots of different ways that you can find out what's happening at Parliament. And the session that we've given today, it was done completely free of charge. So everything that we do at Parliament in terms of kind of engaging, educating people is completely free. So if in your the groups that you work with, your network, if you have a group who you think would like a similar session to this, so finding out about campaigning, or a more general session thinking about how Parliament works, then please do get in contact. Have a look on the website. As we said, it's completely free of charge. Me and Gillian, we work with people who might not think to engage with Parliament or haven't done it before. Our job is to kind of help as many people as possible find out about Parliament and get involved. So do have a little look on the website if you have a group who might be interested in a similar session. Okay, lovely. I feel like we've stunned you all into silence.
There's lots of comments on the chat box.
Oh, good.
Nikki and Gillian, that's been fantastic. Thank you so much. It's been informative and actually given me food for thought in campaigning, sort of how to take things forward effectively.
Yeah, I hope so. I think that's a lot of what this session is. It's things to go and mull over, things to go and have a think about and do a bit more, I think, kind of research yourself. Obviously, it's quite a compact session, but yeah, just take a bit of time to have a look around the Parliament website. I think once you start kind of looking, there's lots of stuff on there that can help you out. I think I can show you here. Yeah, so this would be like the front page, all the ways that you can find out what's going on and how to get involved.
We've got a question about how long it would take, what the timescales are if you want to book a session.
Well, with me, because it would, if you're in the east of England, then it would be with me. I'm fully booked for this year, but I'm pretty free from January. So if you fill in that form, then it will be me getting back to you for the east of England. So yeah, from January, I'm pretty free.
Do you just Google Parliament then?
Yeah, parliament.uk. Is it particularly for the session?
No, I meant to actually find out where you can go into this thing that you brought up.
Oh, this page that we're on at the minute.
The page, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it's parliament.uk. I mean, this is just the front page of the website.
Yeah, thank you. It's been really useful.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts and opinions earlier. It was really nice to hear.
That was really nice that you actually managed it the way you did, because often I get silence because it's a subject that not many people want to talk about, but it's a huge problem in this country as it is the world.
Yeah, and I think you're right on that actually if people don't want to talk about it, all the more reason to talk about it and have people, say their experiences, because I think that's probably how problems get worse.
That's right.
Yeah, so thank you.
And I'd just like to say from myself, thank you, Nikki and Gillian. That was really interesting. And as you said, Nikki, we'll make sure that all the information is shared with the attendees, and it will be available on Community Actions Norfolk website, etc., for the wider sector as well. So thank you, everyone, for giving your time today, and I hope it was useful, and look forward potentially to seeing some of you in our rest of our sessions for the conference. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for coming along.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye.